So we'll start this morning with a little short word cloud, and go so on www.nt.com and use the code 932816. And can you just tell us what was your main takeaway from yesterday? I know some people were not there yesterday. People and people from YouTube can also answer to that. Are you answering? Shared passions, lives practices, others. Is it real? Curiosity is fine. So, you should do it. Do you know what? What? Okay, play. Playfulness, guide play. Same issues, game mechanics, music is playful, fun, so it seems that it was not too boring, but fun is the most. Collaboration. It's interesting. Guide, play, fun, collaboration. Curiosity, learning. Zoli. Where's Zoli this morning? Happiness. Guide, play. Interesting. Okay, that's very interesting, guide, but the fun is the main word. Coming out, guide, play, learning, curiosity, collaboration. So it's very good, very, very good. Thank you. So we'll start this morning with our second keynote with Fares Kayali, and she's from Austria, Vienna, and he will have a keynote about game design and playful music interaction as methods of project-based learning. So thank you very much to be with us this morning. If you want to have his, yes, of course. If you want to read his biography and abstract of his communication, it's on the website. So thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you for having me. I'll show you something developed.
Just a second. It's for you.
So hi again. I'm gonna get back to that a little later. So I've changed the title of my talk a little bit. I got rid of the project-based teaching which is implicitly still part of some of the things I'm going to show you, but I wanted to widen the scope to include a little bit more. So I'm going to talk about the role of game design in facilitating playful music interaction. Being 40 years old, I took on the first music game I played, which was in the Commodore 64. Does anybody recognize that? Oh, really? Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Okay. I was really picking my pets if anybody knew it. So it's a very early music game where you start to get into the charts and you have little music mini games where you collect samples and then go to the studio and combine them. It was like the first thing to show me the potential of using music and creativity in a playful manner. My name is Qwerty Accordion. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me. I'm working at the University of Vienna in Austria as a professor of digital education and learning at the Center for Teacher Education. So I teach future teachers of all different fields, from biology to music to computer science to language teaching, in the space of digital learning, using digital tools in learning, and how to prepare people to live in the digitally transformed world. My background is in didactics. I got to that later in my career. My background is computer science. I also am a former game developer. So 10 years back, I was creating music games for entertainment, not for learning. Back when the iPhone was new. And then I got back to university. And I think the common denominator of my work is that I work on living projects. I work in designing technology, and then from an academic perspective, seeing how it fits, what the contexts are, and evaluate what works and what doesn't. So what I'm going to do is, I was really happy to be invited here because the Learning Plain Music formed an arc about things I've always loved to do. I've done obviously game development. I've always loved to work with music, and now I'm learning. So that allowed me to will allow me to walk you through a series of projects I've done over time. And what I'll try to do is identify how musical play is made accessible in these projects, and then I'll try to form some bridges to learning. Some will be clearer, some will be more fuzzy. So I introduced the subtitle, and subtitle is a game designer's perspective on music and learning. I'll start with an older project of mine, which I created with Qwerty Accordion in 2006-07, which allows me to show you my meager French skills. It's called Bagatelle Concrète. It's an appropriation of a pinball machine. So what we did in that project is we bought an old pinball machine from the 60s, 70s I think, and we removed the scoring, we removed all the things that make it look like a game, and instead we put the speakers on top instead of the scoreboard, and we let people play for music instead of for a score. So that the title Bagatelle Concrète refers to two terms. It refers to the bagatelle, which was the ancestor of modern pinball machines in the 17th century, actually. I don't know if you know bagatelles, but it's where you have those pins and you throw a ball up top and then it lands in different areas. I think what's in Japan is now the pachinko games, more or less. But that was also the ancestor of modern pinball. And pinball then actually got rolling in the 40s, 50s, and that was the same time where we saw the start of musique concrète, which originated in France. And with the advent of the tape recorder. So it was the first was the ancestor of electroacoustic music and used the very simple principles of recording a sample and playing it forward, backward, slower, faster, or several times in a row. And what we did is we changed that pinball machine into a music concrete sampling machine. So we put microphones on the plate below the playing field and sensors. So I'll show you. So that was the original game, and that's the cleaned up version. And we got inside of it. There's a lot of wires. And on the diagram on the right, you can see how we approach it. So the red circles are where we placed piezo microphones to sample what's going on in the playing field. And the blue circles show you where we put sensors. So, for example, you have the 3 targets on top, and if you shoot the targets down, something happens. So we wanted to keep that. You're not going to get rewarded with points, you're going to get rewarded with changes in the musical score that's played. So what the pinball machine does is, for example, if the ball gets caught up in the bumpers, it's going to take a sample, and then it's going to play back that sample according to the state it's currently in. And by playing the game, you can exert some control over the musical result. So in a sense, when you play with the Bagatelle Concrete, you try to discover what your influence over the music is. So what I tried to summarize here is that musical gameplay in this pinball machine is a kind of discovery where you find out what your agency is. So in electroacoustic music, you have those, in German we say flächig, so you don't have defined rhythm or harmony, but you have shapes of sounds that change slowly over time, and you discover what influence you have on these sound layers. And this pinball machine was exhibited in a museum. So as a museum exhibit, there is an implicit learning aspect, and the learning occurs through exploration. And the learning domains here are pretty obvious. It's you learn how to understand electroacoustic music by interacting with it, and there's only little reference to the history of playing music in the Bagatelle and the music concrete. The next example I'll show you is even more distant from actual learning applications. It's a game that's created for entertainment only. But I would argue, and I think you will agree, that play always constitutes some kind of learning experience. So that's one of the iPhone games we created, and it's hyperspace music shoot 'em up. So what does that mean? You have a spaceship and you fly around, and you fly in a game world that's made to let you experience music. What we did is we designed everything in that game to act in sync with the music. So it's very rhythm oriented. It's not a rhythm game like Guitar Hero where you have to act in rhythm. So what we tried to do is be the antithesis of rhythm games, not forcing you to act in rhythm, but making you want to act in rhythm by making everything in the game be controlled by the rhythm. So it's a very basic shoot 'em up game. Your spaceship goes from left to right. You have enemy formations coming in, and for example, if there's enemy spaceships and they go full circle, that would take 1 bar in the music. Or if they shoot at you, they will shoot at 1/8 in the beat of the music. Every cylinder will pulsate. I'll show you in a second. And maybe just to understand how you control it, you use 2 fingers, one to control your spaceship, and the other finger is used to select the enemies, and they're going to be targeted, and on the next beat, they dissolve. So the interaction doesn't have to be exactly in rhythm, but the feedback you get is in rhythm. So here's how that works. musical gameplay as a form of experience. The whole game was designed to experience music. We had a licensed soundtrack from techno to house music, and sometimes techno music are very long pieces, so in the game you could even play a 10-minute techno piece, for example. We split it up to make it interesting for mobile gameplay as well, but you could really experience a full piece of electronic music. And you would, I would not say that there are strong learning aspects to that, but still you could learn by immersing yourself and by diving into an electronic music piece in an interactive form. You create a different kind of understanding how that kind of music works. So the next project I'm going to show you is something more current. We did that for the last couple of years. And it's about something we call playful technology-mediated music audience participation. So it was a 2-year art-based research project where we explored how we can use technology to make music performances accessible to the audience, so to actually integrate the audience in a music performance. We produced a video that introduces this quite nicely, so just play that.
Breaking the Wall is an interdisciplinary project. Researchers collaborate with sound artists to explore the potential of technology-mediated audience participation in live music. The goal is to investigate how technical interfaces can break the fourth wall between audience and music performers. We use art-based research as our method of investigation. Art-based research is the systematic use of the artistic process to generate knowledge. In a 1-year-long participatory design process with artists, we created 3 interactive music performances. We validated the performances at the Breaking the Wall music event in Vienna. Three robots move around randomly in the performance space. They interact with the audience to create a collaborative soundscape. The artist remotely triggers sounds and visuals on audience smartphones using ultrasound. The audience shapes the overall soundscape by their movement through the performance space. Lasers and spotlights surveil the audience. Their movements affect the music. We collected empirical data using audience surveys and video analysis. An embedded artist researcher observed and provoked the audience. The data allow us to map the design space for technology-mediated audience participation. The apps and technologies are available open source.
That project, musical gameplay, was designed as a form of participation, of inviting on the one hand the audience to participate in a musical performance, but also in the sense of the title of the project, to break the fourth wall between audience and performer. And what we learned is that it goes both ways, so that not only the audience has to interact, but the performers have to defer control, and that was one of the very interesting aspects of this project, was to learn what is permissible for artists, so what kind of degree of control you can give to the audience, what they are willing to forfeit, and what not. So the whole design process was in that was to find the right balance of finding the right parameters that are interesting for the audience to exert some influence, because you have to have a certain degree of influence so that it feels satisfying, that you find some agency, even though there were around between 50 and 200 people interacting. So you still have to see yourself as some kind of active part of the performance. On the other hand, you have the music artists who still want some creative control over the results, and we had some very interesting compromises we had to make. So for example, the second performance, which had the smartphones. So I'm maybe going to explain that because I think it didn't get fully through the video. So we had smartphones with an app, and the artist would send ultrasound signals, which is pretty cool because you don't need any Wi-Fi. And they get picked up by the microphone of the audience's smartphones, and that would trigger a sample to be played back on the audience's smartphones. So it's a very subtle way without using any Wi-Fi and without people having any distractions on their phones, because you don't need Wi-Fi. And then the audience's phones would create a soundscape in the room. And the idea is that people move around, and by the flashing colors of the smartphones, you can see which sample you have. So people would have different samples, and they could form groups of homogeneous groups of people having the same sample, or they could decide to mingle and combine different samples, and that would change the whole ambience of the room. And what you saw were those stations where you could dock your phone, and we had contact microphones where you could amplify what your phone made. So in a surround sound setting, there was a center stage. And that was, for example, something the artist, last second, she objected to it. So we worked on that for several months. And then at the last moment, she said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that, I don't like it. Because there were some interference noises when you moved the contact microphone to the wrong spot. You got some interference from the circuitry in the phone. And she was like, nah, I don't want that. I'm not going to give up that much control. So in the last couple of hours, we hacked together something that people could still use those stations, and they would have some influence on the visuals we provided. So there's this aspect of the interaction still stayed there. And the performance ended up being really fine because she turned down the overall volume. So you could really hear what the smartphones themselves made. But it was also a very interesting example of how the whole interaction process turned out and how those compromises were made. So I think an interesting design aspect here was abstraction, and that's something that I've found across many projects in using music in digital games or with digital technology, is that there's some kind of abstraction involved, so that you have to expose parameters of music, be it rhythm, be it samples, be it filters, and that you have to abstract something from music, and then this abstracted thing can be handed over either to a player in a game or to the audience in that particular setting. So I'm at about half of my talk now, and these three examples all were within the domain of music, so where you would have musical gameplay, and what you would understand through it would also be in the domain of music itself. I'm now going to jump to three different examples which transfer musical gameplay to other learning domains. Because I think that's also a big potential, and that was what the first video was about, so the Muppets. Do you remember that there was a timeline below the video where you could see two players? So that was a serious game with the idea to further cultural diversity by letting people co-create mashups on YouTube. And it wasn't necessarily that they had to use music, but most of them did, because it just became a natural form of communicating through little snippets of music videos. So actually the most content we got was rap music, because in Austria we have quite a vibrant rap music scene. It's not internationally known, but there's a lot of local rap music. There's a lot of Viennese rap music, for example. But there we have many migrant cultures, like many Turkish migrants, many migrants from ex-Yugoslavia, and they all have their own rap music subcultures. And the premise of the project was that there's a lot of cultural segregation among youth in Vienna, so that it is known there was a pre-study, and through the study we learned that, which is quite obvious, I think, and it probably holds true for other areas as well, that there's not too much exchange between different ethnic groups of young people, and those groups are also very homogeneous in terms of age and in terms of gender. And the research question we followed with the project was, can we do an online game that helps permeate those barriers between those groups, and that facilitates some kind of exchange between those groups of youth. So what we created was, at the time, a Facebook game. I would never do a Facebook game again, but at the time it was the right thing to do. Because I think we did it in 2012, 13, and at that time, youth in Austria were on Facebook, I think 95%. That has changed, because the older generation is now on Facebook, so Facebook is not interesting anymore. But at the time, it was a good choice. And we used YouTube, because I also found that very interesting. You might know these studies, but YouTube was, at the time at least, the primary means of accessing music. There are even those studies where you have young people interpret the quality of YouTube music videos as higher than the CD quality, because that's just what they're used to. So we tried to tap into the potential of Facebook and the potential of YouTube and the importance both held in music culture. We created that community where you would just put something out. So we would go to YouTube, you would cut out a short segment, it could be 5 to 15 seconds long, you put that into the community, and then somebody else could find an answer and pick up what you did and append another clip of 5 to 15 seconds length. And then that the metaphor was versus battles, like in DJ culture, that versus battle would start. The whole thing was asynchronous, so you didn't have to be online at the same time. You had 24 hours to respond. And when the 1 minute mark was reached, the mashup was complete, and it was transferred back into the community, and people could vote on it, and it could go to the charts. And the twist we had is that when you got into the dialogue, you wouldn't know who that person was. So you would just see the avatar, which were very abstract, and only when you completed the video together, the curtain would be lifted and you could click through to the Facebook profile of the other person. So that was the research aspect. And what we tried is, we tried to show youth that it might be somebody who's really different than you are, who you wouldn't necessarily want to communicate or wouldn't dare to communicate or whatever, that you could still interact with on that level. So that's the research question I told you. So the question was if through playing that game, Viennese teenagers would shift their understanding of cultural diversity. Yeah, that's what I actually told you. So here you can see how videos are created. So you watch what somebody did, then you have the in-game YouTube browser, and you wouldn't even do video editing, you would just record. So you just press record, stop, and that's how you set it. That's the Muppets again. So we evaluated the whole project through a whole bunch of qualitative interviews. So we did more than 50 in-depth qualitative interviews, and we did social network analysis, not online, but how the friendship networks of youth changed to the project. And the results we found very interesting. So we found that that the game did not impact the actual friendship network. So there were some examples of people who got to know each other through that game, but that was not really significant. So people would not play such a game and then become friends all the time. But what we saw in the interviews was that a little shift in understanding occurred for many. So in particular, I told you about the rap music, and what we saw there, we also looked at the results the kids produced, and we saw that they tried to pick up on what other people did. They tried to find, they said to us, like, they tried to identify the language and tried to find something in the same language. And they tried to create those cultural dialogues that we were hoping they would do. So the whole premise here was to build on musical gameplay as a form of communication. And the learning that would occur is by empathizing with who you're playing with. So that was the learning mechanic. And as I said, it's different learning domains than music itself. So learning domains here are diversity and social behavior. And the last thing I didn't tell you that was a surprising result for us was media literacy. So we worked a lot with youth centers, and we also worked a bit with schools. And the unexpected thing was that the game worked really nice in a localized setting. So it was an online game, but it ended up being used in youth centers by the youth workers as a means of, let's get together, let's create something together, let's discuss how a good video looks like, how can you make interesting transitions between different clips. You could cut by rhythm, you could cut by the narrative, you could make a cut by color or whatever. So it opened up a whole media literacy discussion which we didn't expect. So that was also interesting. The next project I'm talking about is Sparkling Instruments. It's still ongoing. And in Sparkling Instruments, we enable school children to create their own digital music instruments. And as the title of the project says, the design of such instruments is meant as a means of teaching both creative and technological literacy. So the two research questions of the project are, on the one hand, if designing and making and then using your own playful digital music instruments helps you understand new forms of music making. And the second question is if this do-it-yourself approach is able to arouse or deepen interest in MINT subjects. MINT is the wrong word, that's German actually. STEM. So it's STEM learning, science, technology, learning. And what we did was have a series of workshops. So we would start by presenting different digital musical instruments to them, some iPad applications, Qwerty Chaos Pad, one of my favorites is back at Norion, if you know it. It's like a sequencer which you can hold, where you can assign patterns on it. And we would discuss what makes those things an instrument, what are the creative possibilities you have, and for them to get a feeling of how such instruments work. And then they would go on to build their own, experiment with sensors, with interfaces. We exposed them to 3D printing, laser cutting, and the whole scope of digital fabrication methods. And they would actually solder their own circuitry to create a music instrument. We achieved this by collaborating with people from the University of Applied Arts in Vienna who created a very nice, simple logic board, which you can see here. It basically has 3 oscillators, which you can then either use knobs to control, or you can put on different sensors which would control the data, so distance sensor, temperature, or whatever you like, or an accelerometer. And these boards are really cheap, so you can have them produced in China for less than $1 storage, and the whole materials you need are very, very easy to get. You need some resistors, condensators. It's all actually pretty cheap learning materials. You only need to provide the basic soldering equipment, and then that's an example of how the instrument looks like. Then they looked across a series of workshops. First, create the instruments, and then we had what we called composition and performance workshops to move towards a collaborative performance. So first, and that really blurred into each other. So the composition workshops were for them to get an idea of how their instrument behaves and what its possibilities are. And they were at the same time used to repair stuff that were broken all the time. And then the performance workshops had the aim of creating a collaborative performance. And I'm going to show you two of the performances.
Letztes Jahr gemacht haben. Wir beginnen mit der ersten Gruppe.
So I think you can hear it. It's also very experimental. It's electroacoustic music again, and that was really interesting for the students to get their head around. Because at first, some really hated it. So they were like, "Nah, but that's not music. That's noise. We don't understand it. We don't want to do it." And the group I'm going to show you next, they were the most critical of it. It's like, we want to do popular music. We want to do something that's nice. And what they did was resisted first, and then they created the most interesting performance because they ended up taking ownership of the process, and they created a conducted performance. They even created their own notation to represent the music they created.
Eine grafische Notation und mit dem Dirigieren auseinandergesetzt.
Expressing yourself, and in particular as a form of expressing yourself as a group. So that was really interesting. And we had 3 groups. Each group was around 10 students, and they all each created their own performance. In reference to learning by doing, we said the project was about learning through making, with making being a reference to the scope of means of the digital fabrication and digital production that gets accessible, even more accessible over time. So I think we're just at the start of digital production tools being easily available in schools. And I mean, I'm aware that there's a lot of overstated potential. We know that there are a lot of 3D printers that are bought for schools and never used. But I think also in terms of programming, so programming is getting accessible over time, and I think in maybe 5 years' time we're going to be able to talk to a computer and tell it to do simple programming tasks. So that will open up new possibilities in creating interactive experiences without actually diving into technology. So that's what I mean to reference by the learning through making term. And I think that's very important, because I think being a technologist myself with a background in computer science, I think it's time that everybody takes part in creating technology, and that it's not something that's restricted to the geeks and nerds, if that will, I love it. but I think it would be good for society if people are able to participate in those processes around technology. And I think creative approaches can be something that eases people into technology creation, because it's still something where people feel a barrier. And for example, most people are able to identify with music, and that music is something they like to do. And that can be a way to trick them into, or ease them into the whole technology world. So the learning domains here were pretty diverse. There was learning around music, but there was also math, physics, and computer science knowledge involved. And we did not fully complete the evaluation yet, but what we saw is that we did not get tons of factual knowledge, because we didn't link to the school subject, so we did not have a math lesson that picks up on what you did. But we got a lot of raised interest, so from the discussions with teachers and also with students, we saw like they began to ask, how does a condensator work? What does it do? Why does that influence how my instrument sounds? So we pretty much saw that the interest level got up, and also they got a lot of practical skills. They learned how to solder and how to use those digital production tools. The last thing I'm going to show you is from yet another domain. It's games for health, and I spent quite some time working with technology in healthcare. And it's a mobile music game we created with the Medical University of Vienna for prosthetic training. So people who lost an arm and who have to train how to use their prosthetic device. Maybe I'll quickly explain. It's explained in the video as well, but maybe it's better if I explain it first so you can understand it better. But when you get a prosthetic device, nerve signals are used to control that arm. And the simple example is that you use two signals, for example, the flexor with this muscle, or the residual muscle that's still left after amputation, and the extensor with this one. And for example, you would use those two muscles to rotate your prosthetic arm. So flexing, or imagining to flex, would rotate left, extending would rotate right. And then you have to learn how to flex both at the same time. It's when you quickly open up your hand, you can try it. Quickly open your hand, then you flex both. And that would be used to switch functions. So you could switch from rotation to clasping. So you switch, and then you flex to clasp, or you extend to open, close, open. So, and that can be more complex. You can have more signals, and what medicine can do here is pretty amazing. So, for example, the breast muscle is actually 7 or 8 different muscles, and what they do in surgery is they transfer some of those signals to your arm. And it's about neuroplasticity, about training your brain to be able to access those nerves. And when you succeed in training, it becomes natural. It's not like I told you, like flex and extend and switch function. It just becomes like your body again, in the ideal case, but it's very hard. And it's a very tedious process, and it's it's harder for some and easier for others. And many discard their prosthetic arm and hand because it's too hard. So we tried a music approach, and I'm going to show
losing one's hand or arm leads to severe impairments in everyday life. Through myoelectric prosthesis, we can restore limb functionality and help those people back into self-dependency. Such a prosthesis is controlled by the muscle signals in the patient's residual limb. Learning how to control a myoelectric prosthesis can be a discouraging experience. Patients have to learn how to control a robotic arm by sending their thoughts down their nerves to contract the muscles they still have left at the stump. For a functional prosthetic control, patients need to be able to both isolate individual muscle signals and to simultaneously activate them. Using game-based therapies has proven to be a stimulating way to increase patient motivation, effort, and performance during otherwise monotonous exercises.
Research question here is, can we make a music game that is engaging in the long term and also leads to an increase in parameters for neuromuscular rehabilitation?
To answer this question, the Christian Doppler Lab for Bionic Reconstruction at the Medical University of Vienna, together with the Positive Impact Games Lab at the Vienna University of Technology, have created a music-based mobile game.
Previously, we have used game-based approaches in healthcare applications and in well-being to keep up patient motivation.
The created game represents a mobile-based long-term intervention for prosthesis training and thereby shows the potential for mobile apps to establish a new standard in motor rehabilitation.
We used the Myo armband of 10 claps for the signal recording. The signal processing was implemented in an Android application, and we used the Unity 3D engine for the game development.
Through playing the game, patients gradually improve their ability to willingly activate muscles and to make full use of their prosthesis.
Usually in rehabilitation, we rely on repetitive exercises and movements.
In this game, players conduct flexor and extensor muscle activation in rhythm, with the music, and according to visual cues.
And coming up here, you have 2 arrows, and this corresponds to a more stronger activation of your muscle. So you really have to contract harder.
I'm sitting here in the boring room. It's just another rainy Sunday afternoon. I'm wasting my time, I got nothing to do.
This is easy and it is much more fun to play with music.
I'm almost finished though. So that was the 2 arrows for the flexing pose. And I think that's the most satisfying moment in the game when you did those at the same time. And you can play it, of course, if you have your arm too. So that game is used in actually as a long time between having an amputation or losing a limb and having the nerve transfers, and there's sometimes a series of surgeries until you are fully prepared. There's a lot of healing involved, and also the fitting and production of the prosthetic device takes some time. So there's a time of up to a year between until people get their prosthetic arm, and the game is used during that device. And for that game, we were happy to show that it also holds up in clinical validation. So we had both validated improvements in muscle coordination and strength, and more importantly, have those transferred to actual prosthetic control. So the musical gameplay here would be a form of training. We would learn through the feedback and by repetition. And I think where music comes here is as a feedback instrument, because you get implicit feedback in the rhythm and the strength of that activation. And the learning domain again would be something outside of music. In that case, it would be broadly motor control. So, summarized, I tried to give an overview of different ways or different functions musical gameplay can have. I showed you discovery, experience, participation, communication, creativity, and that can transfer to a series of learning mechanics. And I think what binds those learning mechanics together is that they are about what aspects of music you expose for control. If you go back to the prosthetic device game, you expose rhythmic actuation, you have the force, the loudness, for example, or if you go to the audience participation example, you have the samples you choose, for example. So you have to choose what you expose in music gameplay for interaction, how it affects the overall composition, so that it still stays something that's interesting and maybe harmonic or rhythmic. And I think it's, in general, if you create those music games, in particular in the context of learning, it's always a balance. I talked about the balance between performers and audience, but there's also a balance between freedom and constraints. So you have to give away some freedom for players so that it's enjoyable, that it feels interactive, and that it feels like making music. It doesn't have to be making music in the literal sense, but you have to have that experience. So like a racing game makes you feel like you're driving a race car. You're not driving an actual race car, but you feel like you're doing it. And the music game, a good one, it gives you that feeling of being a musician. And on the other hand, you have to constrain it because you want it to still sound nice or interesting, and you have to impose constraints on the experience. To quantize rhythm, for example, or to use a pentatonic scale to make it harmonious, or to go to electroacoustic music, which gives you more freedom. So there's a lot of challenging in designing that. And yeah, I just tried to give an overview of learning domains. I think there can be many more. There can be many more, like we see here, many more applications in music, education in particular. That's, I think, where you are more expert than I. But there can be many domains. Where music can be a vehicle, we say in German. Like, music can be a means to ease people into. So I want to close with a quote by one of my favorite video game designers of music games, Tetsuya Mitsuguchi, who just said that as a game designer, you have to know what is the essence of music. I don't know. I think we don't know. I found it nice to close with, and I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Do you have some questions? Yes?
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really, really interesting. The arm was amazing. And as a music teacher at high school, there's a lot of parents that are asking why music is important. I will show them this video. I find it interesting your turn, your video game turn, because you develop your games based on learner needs. I find it interesting that you develop your games based on learner needs, like social and collaborative skills, empathy, by example, for this game. Often it's the opposite that we see. We see technologies that are looking for application. But you, by this game, you start from the needs of the target audience to develop your application with technologies. And I think
yeah, maybe a short comment on that. So you recognize that correctly, and I'm thankful. So what we try to use, so my background is also in human-computer interaction, and the process we like to use is participatory design. So where we try to have people from the target audience involved in the design process at early stages and help shape the design and then ideally you get results that are relevant to people.
I'd like to congratulate you for your work as well. I think a lot of them are really interesting for even in school context, like the one with building instrument out of electronics. I think like those experiences where students may have the opportunity to build an instrument and to try it. I've seen it a couple of times with different type of instruments, and it's always resulted into having a lot of fun, being stimulating experience for children. So congratulations for that. I'd like to ask you a question. We had an example of this pinball machine working. Can we see a video of this somewhere on YouTube?
No, it's lost.
Oh, it's lost.
No, I tried to find one actually for the presentation because there's nothing.
Okay, that's I would love to see it.
Yeah, me too. the machine still exists, but yeah.
Thank you. Another question? Yes?
Thank you so much for the breadth of the musical engagements you've created. Amazing. In the Breaking the Wall, I think that was the name of it, was the artist the visionary for how the sound would be manipulated, or was that a team decision, or how did that work?
I'm both. So that was really a long participatory design process, as I discussed earlier. So we had the artists involved from the start, but it was a team of artists plus people developing technology, plus the research team, which included myself and a couple of colleagues. So in that team, we had some processes were longer, some were shorter, so that the ultrasound phone example was the one we took the most time to develop. So we had a half-year period where we would not meet not continuously work on it, but meet every now and then and iterate. Yeah, so it was interesting, and it was also interesting for us to learn that despite such a participatory process, things don't hold up in the end sometimes. So that was also important to learn.
Another question?
I think you have
one. Okay.
That was one.
Sure.
Good morning. I am curious about the sparkling instruments. You mentioned that the students developed some kind of notation for the instruments. I'd like to know if there was like a background of electronic composers, or if the students developed the notation by themselves, and if they did, if there was like a systematization of this notation, like use the same kind of system for all of them, or it was done like each of them?
So, yeah, they did not get any introduction to electroacoustic music notation. I think that was one part of your question. They came up with the idea of having a conducted performance, so that was the start of it. And they did very directly represent what she did with her arms, so that up and down, and that corresponded to turning the knobs. So it was not a very strict notation, but it was more malleable, I think, in the sense of just saying which instrument should have an upward slope and then down, and how that would relate to each other. So it was quite an organic, not very accurate representation they created themselves.
Okay, so you can continue the discussion during the lunchtime or the coffee break. So we'll continue this morning with another game designer, which is Avery. I don't know if it's Wu. Okay, thank you. He is a designer who has his own company in his mom perfectly viable. history of serious business. Yes.
Should we talk to the microphone here? Yes? Okay. Everyone can hear me really well? With the microphone, without one? Is this really working? A little higher? How about now? Yeah? Okay. So should I just wait or should I keep talking?
Just try it.
How we doing? Can we hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, great. All right, well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Avery Brew. I'm from the United States, but I've lived in Montreal for about 10 years, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about serious games, where it's come from, where we are a little bit today, and a little bit also about video game studies. It's really interesting to be here because I've never really been in a conference where we've talked about music, which is so playful, and then kind of the connection with games. And so it's really exciting for me to be here because I'm learning so much. And I'm hoping to bring you some value in terms of like an overview of kind of this industry, which is budding and growing, but running into some obstacles. So I'm going to try to expose you to both of those. Before I start, I'd like to just ask you a quick question. Who considers themselves to be a gamer? You can raise your hand. There's an American from California who founded the Institute of Play. His name is Dr. Stuart Brown. And he did a lot of research into games and relationship with games. And what he found was, through listening to a lot of stories of serial murderers, was that when they were growing up, they didn't really have a successful relationship with play, but they didn't have a relationship at all with play. So I'm going to ask you that question again. Who considers themselves to be a gamer? And when I say games, I mean a gamer, I mean board games, card games, sports, video games. Right. So the idea is that we all are gamers. We love games. It's very natural for us to like games. You don't have to be a hardcore gamer. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself right now. I studio. We run a studio of about 12 people. We make games for banks, for hospitals, for the classroom. So we're using the idea of games and you bring them into other kind of realms for something other than pure entertainment. So we can call them serious games. And I am the least gamer of everyone. I play Candy Crush. I did not play Farmville, but I did play Candy Crush. I like games like Heads Up. And my colleagues like them too, but I'm purely a casual gamer, whereas my colleagues play like mid-core games and hardcore games that take you hundreds of hours to complete. So I frequently look at myself and say, am I a real gamer? And really I am a real gamer, just like all of you. Just because you don't like hardcore games doesn't mean you're not a real gamer. So just to give you a kind of overview of what we're going to be doing today, I want to talk to you a little bit about like why should you care about games and video games. Talk about a short history of game studies, video game studies, as well as serious games, and then give you a few examples. And I'm hoping to give you kind of a framework that you can use to kind of talk about games with a little bit more on an academic side, because the fun, hopefully you just have fun playing games and you kind of get that experience personally when you play. So why should you care? Currently, based on the research, about 67% of households in North America are playing games. It's a lot. But it's not the 14-year-old boy in his basement that's playing games. It's 34 years old is about the average age for a gamer. And it's about 52% to 40% in terms of women playing games. That's not lost on the video game developers. Candy Crush was not targeted towards men. I played it, but I played it with a lot of grandmothers in the world and a lot of women, middle-aged women. And same with Farmville. These were two of the biggest grossing games in the past, 10 years, 12 years. So we're all playing games, we're all people who play games, when they're considered themselves to be a gamer, they play about 10,000 hours worth of games from the age of, let's say, 5 to about 18. And that's also about the same amount of time that kids are spending in school. So I think the question we can ask ourselves is not should we be using video games or the benefits of video games, the advantages of video games for learning? It's really a question of how do we do that. So in terms of video game studies and how video games or games in general have been looked at by researchers, one of the first people to look at this was Johan Huizinga, who comes from the Netherlands. And what he looked at, or he kind of put forth his theory is that as animals are already playing, they play with each other to socialize and to learn how to survive. Same thing with humans. We have a very intimate link with play, but that he looked at play as kind of presupposing culture and actually generates culture. So if you talk about poetry, was really our playful work with words and language. Same thing with riddles, or if you look at the law of putting on a wig and dressing up in a courtroom, that was also kind of born from our play. So we talked about how play kind of generates culture as opposed to culture generating play. He also was the person who brought up the first idea of this magic circle, so that life is pretty ordinary and boring, but when I go into a game, it becomes extraordinary. You know, it's not just kicking the ball into the goal. It's David versus Goliath. It's good versus evil. It's this narrative that kind of comes out of games where we lose track of time and we lose track of who we are. So it's the idea of getting into flow, which is also something that the magic circle was even before the idea of flow. So this guy was kind of very ahead of his time. Roger Caillois, who is a sociologue from France, he was one of the first people to talk about the difference between play and games. Play being exploratory, not many rules, not much competition, versus game, which was more strategic and there was kind of an end result. It's really interesting when I'm with you because one of the things I've kind of understood through this conference, I don't play a musical instrument, I like to listen to music, but I don't create music. It's this idea of how playful music really is and how close to gaming can become and how you guys are really kind of bridging that gap in such an interesting way. So it's really, really fun to be here and to kind of have this new perspective on play and games, which I did not have before. So since then, we've had kind of an explosion in the world of video games. I think that it was around 1952 when the first video game came out, which was this Pong game, which is still pretty cool if you want to play a video game. And then since then, we've had different consoles that have come out. And just like in kind of writing, when the first writing was really a way to deal with accounting, and then the years that came after, we had Shakespeare, we had rap, and we had all these different kind of ways that we've used writing. Well, that's the same thing that's happening going on in video games. We've had video games for, let's say, about 60 years, so it's really a new field. And with the explosion of technological peripherals, whether they be haptics or virtual reality or wearables, augmented reality, the possibilities are limitless. So we're really at the beginning of what video games can do. This is very, very new. And same thing with video game studies. We started out with kind of looking at, video games are incredibly violent. If you look at this game called Death Race, you think, oh my gosh, how could my child ever play this game? It's going to just melt their brain. But when you actually look at the game, it wasn't very violent at all. So there was this kind of stereotype, which in a lot of ways wasn't legitimate. There were a lot of video games that were violent. But I think that looking at just the violence of video games is limiting, and it doesn't really harness all of the positive elements of video games that we can look at and we can use to, for instance, learn music. So today there's just an incredible amount of organizations, whether they be academic, not-for-profit, that are looking at video games and funding video game studies. It's, everyone here, you guys are all familiar with this, it's possible to get grants to do research with nationally funded organizations because I think people are coming to the realization that there are a lot of benefits with video games. So here's just a quick list of video game studies. It's obviously way too small, but if you want my PowerPoint, I can send it to you and you can read through them. You might already be familiar with them. And here's some of the reasons why video games are so powerful. I mean, this is not like school, which is somewhat obligatory and kind of fragmented. We're talking about experiences that are chosen by the user, that they are incredibly well designed so that they take someone from the idea of not knowing how to play it and they bring them on a learning curve, which is very, very well thought out and very well designed with a lot of user testing and player feedback. And you have this choice. I want to play a game. You can't force someone into a game. You can force them into a game. The game experience will be less good if that's the case. But the idea is really, how do I get my player to fall into the rabbit hole? That's the design term, which means how do I get my player to kind of want to play the game? And so if you can create an experience like that to learn music, for instance, it's something that's very, very powerful. So in terms of serious games, this is also a newer field that has a lot of cool things that are happening to it, but there's a lot of obstacles, which I don't know how time to go into today, but it's not a perfectly easy business. This is what I do for a living, and so I have an intimate understanding of that. But there are a lot of opportunities. When we talk about serious games, we frequently use this little diagram to kind of explain the idea of how interactivity with traditional textbooks and video games, as we kind of go towards the middle, we kind of are able to merge them. So this is a visual representation. It's not the only way to think of serious games. It's just kind of a visual representation of that. And the first person to really come up with this definition of serious games, and this is just one term that's used. There's other terms. Serious games, they're called transformative games. They can be called applied games. They can be called educational games. All these terms are really pretty ugly, if you ask me. None of them are very sexy. And although it's not necessarily super important for things to be sexy, sometimes to make a sexy name, it's easier for them to catch on. So there is a benefit to having a cooler name. And if anyone has any ideas out there, feel free to come to me, and I'd love to hear them, because I almost hate the term serious game. Because games are not serious by nature, and that's the fun of them. So this is the term so far that we're stuck with. Hopefully we can do something with it. So Clark App was one of the first people to come up with the term serious games, and the way he described it was serious games have an explicit and carefully thought out educational purpose and are not intended to be played primarily for amusement. Some of his work was brought about through work that he did on some Cold War strategy war games, and that's where a lot of serious game work came from originally, was through the military. And this is the first person who came up with the definition, so the military and serious games, there is a link between those. Here's another game called Kriegspiel, which was used by the Prussians in the Franco-Prussian War around 1870, which was a strategy game to teach offense and defense, and so it was a way to kind of teach strategy through a game. Pierre de Coubertin, who was a French researcher and educator, he was the father of the modern day Olympics, and what he talked about was a lot of using games and athletics to create excellence in physical education and in education in general. So this is a way to look at games as not just, or serious games, not just as kind of video games and board games, but also as kinds of in terms of sports. And this is a game that you probably have all played before, but you may never ever seen this version of it. Does anyone know this game? Monopoly. It was called the Landlord's Dilemma when it first came out around the turn of the century, around 1900, somewhere around there. And you might not like the game, but the design, the serious game design, was incredibly powerful, because what Elizabeth Magier wanted to put forward was the idea that monopolies are not that effective. They're not that fun. And if you play the game, that's exactly what happens. There's one person who wins. It's a zero-sum game. It's incredibly competitive. The only thing you might be able to do if you're losing is cheat a little bit, which is also kind of what people do when there's a monopoly. So the game itself, you might say, it's not an incredible experience, but it is a very good learning tool or teaching tool. Around the 1990s, serious games and edutainment kind of became popular, but the designs were quite poor. This is a fraction game, if you will. So I do my multiple choice question, and if I get it right, I score a basket, and if I don't get it right, I miss the basket. So the mechanics of the game and the learning are totally separate, and it's not really that exciting. And this is maybe more gamification, but even that is not so well designed. Again, another relationship with the military. This is called America's Army, which was a game that came out I think around 2002. And it was a way for the United States military to, through a first-person shooter game, to teach people about what it's like to be in the Army, and it was a marketing tool. So we talk about serious games, they can be educational, but they can also be used for marketing, they can also be used for help, they can be used for a lot of different terms, or a lot of different domains. And then we get to around 2005 when two other researchers from the United States simplified the definition, so it's a game whose ultimate goal is something other than pure entertainment. If you remember, Clark Appy talked about, you know, the design, the purpose of the design and all these things. These two researchers just simplified it, which in some ways is good, but then in other ways it's not so good. So if you look at, for instance, SimCity and Civilization, you know, these games are pure entertainment games, but you get a lot out of them. I actually work with a lot of different entrepreneurs, and it's very interesting, but a lot of entrepreneurs love SimCity, like very successful entrepreneurs play SimCity, and I don't know if it's a cause and effect or a correlation, but maybe if there is some kind of relationship between, you know, being a successful entrepreneur and playing SimCity, maybe SimCity should be in schools. Obviously, that's a question for another day. I don't have like another 5 minutes, so I don't think we can get into that, but it is a question that I think is an interesting question to talk about. So in terms of serious games taxonomy, this is something that we're formalizing as we go, so we can talk about games for marketing, games for healthcare. This is a growing field, but the issue that we all struggle with is that it's already hard to make a good entertainment game. Add on to that the fact that you've got to learn something, or you've somehow got to transform you, or you've got to apply to something else, makes the task even harder. So, you know, if you look at the number of games in the App Store, I don't know how many there are, there's got to be a million of them. How many of them are good? I don't know, 25. So then you take that same kind of math and you apply it to learning. It's very, very difficult. And then selling those games, I know that maybe many of you out there just say, oh, I want it to be free, I want it to be free. Free is cool, I'm down with that, but it's hard to then maintain it, it's hard to improve on the game, it's hard to then make a second game afterwards, so it is a tough business to be in. It's a fun business to be in because you can be really passionate about your job, but it's not always economically the most feasible line of work to be in. So quickly, I don't know exactly how much time I have maybe another 3 or 4 minutes. I just want to give you a few examples of some serious games. This is one of the best games I find in the world of serious games or educational games. It's the game on the right. It's called Slice Fractions. It comes from the mechanic, like a slicing mechanic, which is a mechanic that was very popular out of mobile games. It comes from like a game like Fruit Ninja. And the idea is that in Slice Fractions, I slice up lava to burn away the ice that's on the bottom, and then my little woolly mammoth on the left side of the screen can move to the right hand side of the screen. And so this game was made by a Montreal company and sold on the App Store. I don't make any money from this, but you should buy it because it's a really great game. And the idea is that slowly but surely the player is introduced to fractions without any numbers, and slowly but surely the numbers come into the screen. And they did a research study on this, and it was really interesting because they found that 3 hours of playing this game took students' levels of understanding of fractions from a 3rd grade to a 4th grade level. And then they also did a comparison between just playing the game and taking a class with a teacher and just playing a class. The 2 game scenarios outperformed just the teacher, and the best performance by the students was with the teacher and with the game. So the idea of kind of replacing the teacher is not something that we're trying to promote, and the research is kind of bearing that out. It's just kind of a tool that we can use. So serious games are not going to solve an entire issue. They're not going to somehow like make the world better, but they can be part of the solution. Is kind of the way we live to talk about it. So here's Remission, which was a game that helped younger people with cancer understand their disease better, and there was a research study that showed that there was improved health outcomes after playing the game. Fat World was a way to help people to understand that there are choices in eating and exercise. You run like a little restaurant in a community, and you help people in your community to eat better or worse, or exercise more or less, and then you've got kind of an understanding of how your actions had consequences in terms of people's weight. So it was kind of an interesting way to play health as opposed to just read about it or talk about it. Quandary is a game that talks about ethics, so it's very similar ethical questions that we have on Earth, except they just put it on a different planet and they kind of make a few of the things different, so that it's kind of easier to talk about these ethical issues with kind of a little bit of distance. And we talked a little bit yesterday about Folded, which was using games to create a way to look at folding proteins in a way that algorithms were not doing so. It was, I think, the University of Washington, and they brought together kind of a bunch of researchers that said, well, how can we outperform an algorithm? How can we get people to be involved in folding up different proteins so that we have an understanding of what are the best ways to fold protein to prevent disease? And it turned out that using games to do that, they got like 57,000 people to play it. Using games was a great way to bring in players. So if we look at the idea of serious games, well, it's a game whose goal is something other than pure entertainment. This here is not only going to learn a little bit about folding, but it's also a way to help researchers. So I use games to help researchers answer a question. So it wasn't just pure entertainment, but it was a way to help researchers answer a question. So that's it. I'm going to do a shameless little plug here. If you like serious games and you're interested in learning more about serious games, we have an awesome conference coming up in July in Montreal. It's called the Serious Play Conference. It's usually happens in the United States. This is the first time we're bringing it up to Canada. It's going to be in Montreal. We are going to have different people present. We're bringing in researchers from around the world. Katie Salem, who's an incredible game design researcher. She's coming in. We're in the process of getting Ubisoft to come in and do one-of-a-kind presentation on all the different serious games that they work on. So if you're interested in this, you can go to Serious Play Conference, I think it is, .com, and you can find it, and you can ask me for any other information that you might have, or any questions you might have. That's it for me. I think I came in under time. I know I went a little fast, but I just wanted to give you an overview, and you can definitely see my slides later. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, have yourself a great day.
Thank you very much, Avery. Questions about serious games? Yes, Amy?
What do you think of the use of those games in the early development to children?
Using serious games or which game?
Yeah. What do you think of if an entreprise would like to get someone that shares serious game for vision box?
Well, honestly, the best example would be slice fraction. So it's like 3rd and 4th grade. If you're talking about younger than that, there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of games that are on the market already. I don't know. I think a lot of them aren't very good at what they say that they're supposed to do, and so you have a design issue, and then there also is kind of like a business model issue, right? I've got to kind of get the kids to play more, and so there's an issue with some of that stuff. With that said, a well-designed game that has a business model that makes sense, I think can be very, very positive. This is the best example of it. Obviously, it's not early. I don't know exactly what you mean by early. 4 or 5 years old.
Is there something with environment, or is there?
There are some. There's games that are made by a Swedish company, and they make called Dragon Math, which is kind of a way to teach kids about algebra, but way early. So it's kind of like a fun way to do it. It's a game that's sold very, very well. It's tough though, because you've got issues with screen time. You've got issues.
Yes. So there's a lot of research about this, but there's some utveckling har man ju väldigt stora energi that has no collisions on användning here, rear point rear book.
If it's well designed, she's asking if it's like, what is my opinion about the games that we use for younger kids, 4 to 5 years old. If it's well designed and it has an educational outcome that's either been researched or can be proven, I think that it's valuable, but it's not a serious game that's a problem. You're talking about screen time, which is a way bigger problem. You're talking about interaction with your phone, which is a way bigger problem. Serious games are like a small part of that. So a well-designed game can be positive, but it's not as positive.
Yes, Andrea?
So, thank you very much for your presentation.
Hello, all on YouTube. So I'm wondering what the opposite of a serious game is. Is it a frivolous game or So I was thinking about that, and also thinking about in learning and teaching. Often, almost always, there are unintended learning. So we can, whether we're using a game or not, as teachers, we can never be sure what our students are receiving. And I imagine it must be the same with serious games. So we can have an intended learning outcome, but there might be a whole, we can never be sure that what we think we're delivering is actually being received, okay? So I'm wondering if, I think you touched on it a little bit with the Sims example. So you wouldn't call it a serious game, so it's some other kind of game. But there might be all kinds of learning that the designer never intended. So then, isn't there a sort of, how do you deal with that tension? And is it really useful to have these categories? It's a bit like, it was making me think about sort of informal and formal education and all of those kind of boxes that we create, and how in real life it's much more complex and messy than that. And I wonder if that is an issue in the gaming world.
I think that's a complicated issue. I think the only thing I would say is, for instance, if you look at Folded, it's it was not made for entertainment. It was really, we need to get people to fold proteins, and by folding proteins, we're going to see if we can beat an algorithm to make folding that's more effective than an algorithm. So the idea is that a serious game, the term does apply pretty well here. It just becomes messy in a gray area where it's, Civilization or SimCity, is it a serious game? Is it an entertainment game? I do think the term is useful, but it's an ugly term and it's not a perfect term either. There's a lot of gray area.
Another question?
Yeah, it's not much a question, it's more like a hint. There's a lot of similitude in between rhythm figures in music and fraction. I think there would be something to develop, this kind of game, this lava slicing game. You can maybe mix it with the music rhythm figure and send it to a lot of music teachers. I think it would work. Maybe there's something to develop there.
I mean, the slicing again, you could integrate that into music, somehow music learning?
Yeah, I think there would be something to develop with that.
It is a very popular, or at least it was a very popular game mechanic, so it won't go away. Fruit Ninja is a cool game, and so if you think it can work, it's definitely something that you should try out.
Thank you. Another question?
Yes. It's more an addition about what you said, Andrea. It's an addition of what you're saying. Mais je vais le dire en français. C'est un peu comme avec ce qu'on s'était dit. C'est que, vous m'aviez mentionné, M. Dubé, que l'intention d'un jeu de divertissement, c'est pas comme un jeu sérieux. Du jeu de divertissement en anglais, c'est?
Entertainment.
An entertainment game. The purpose is not a serious game, so it's not. Il n'y a pas comme d'intention apprentissage des trucs pédagogiques, mais ça ne veut pas dire qu'il n'y a pas nécessairement des apprentissages qui se feront, ou qui se font. So it's not the purpose, but by this game, even if it's not a serious game, they can learn something. But I find it interesting that she told us there's like closed box serious game and non-serious game, but we can learn even things.
Yes, I agree. It's not a perfect term and it's not a perfect box, but I think that the term has some value. How much value is debatable, and we can maybe debate that while we're all drinking about it. Good.
Yes, thank you very much. So we have a coffee break. Thank you very much. We have a short coffee break, and after that we have Alex and Leslie working exactly in the field of music. continue now with Alex Whitman. He's from New York University. And I just want to say, don't forget to put your name about the workshop you want to do this afternoon. I see some are not very on the list, so just to make sure that everything will be fine for the afternoon. So Alex will talk about designing for creative frictions and freedoms and digital music learning experiences. Did that? Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation to share some of the work. My background, I'm a professor at NYU in music education and music technology. I'm also a former middle school general music teacher and technology developer. They need to turn on my volume. Check it. Talking, check. All right, how about that? Is that a little better? Okay, great. So my background, middle school music teacher, but also been involved with designing technologies for a number of years. And 6 years ago, I am close. Right? Okay. I can speak louder. There we go. Okay, fine. Great. So 6 years ago, I came to NYU and founded the Music Experience Design Lab, showing to Muse Ed Lab, and it does play on the overlap from my perspective between education and experience design. It's great here hearing all of these perspectives, primarily from gaming and play. And a lot of the metaphors and language and terminology that's been inspiring my work comes from more of the experience design side of things. There's a lot of overlap here, and a lot of what Faraz was talking about this morning with participatory design has very much influenced our work in the lab. And it's not just me, it's a whole group of people, undergrads through PhD, and then as we have a variety of partner projects that we collaborate on come in and out of the lab, we also work with professional software developers, graphic designers, etc. And what you will be seeing here in my presentation today is going to be some of the getting down and dirty of what we've learned and what we're in the process of learning through these design projects, and what can we learn from designing this work together collaboratively with teachers and students and audience members broadly, and then bring them into education as a process, and that's what my workshop is more in this afternoon, about getting into that. But this is a lot of what our work looks like. We play a lot with modeling and with Legos and other physical materials to come up with designs, to get to know our users, to brainstorm ideas, and bring that into that process. Here are some of my graduate students or undergrad students in China. And here are some examples. A lot of the things that I'm going to be showing you today are interactive websites that we've built for music making and creative play, but we also do work with the physical realm, and working with physical and digital, and also with acoustic instruments. So this was a touch instrument that we co-designed with students in China and students at NYU in Shanghai to kind of explore this concept of Mulan and improvisation and playing with acoustic and digital instruments and designing them together. So that gives you a little window into what we're doing. We've got a number of projects, and again, you can go on to muselab.org and find everything from online learning projects to interactive music making, and that's kind of gets to one of the core things that is behind kind of our ethos in the lab, is that everywhere there's music is an opportunity for music education and for music experience designers to work. And for me, this is why we broadened it out to Music Experience Design Lab rather than education, because we look at working in a variety of spaces, community, schools, online, all these hybrid spaces in between, and really create the lab as an opportunity for our students in music ed and music tech around to come in and kind of explore outside a lot of these things are outside of or they bridge school music learning. And our main four kind of creative guideposts are play, making, tinkering, and curiosity. I've generally kind of pushed back against gaming metaphors and things like that, because for me, part of this research in designing this is trying to figure out what are the intrinsically motivating aspects of musical experience, of creating and improvising. What can we learn by developing tools that are based around those metaphors to design better and more engaging tools for learning and creation? from there. So I'm not necessarily looking at a highly structured domain like gaming and bringing that in. It's like, let's come together and create music. And the other kind of critique, more from the experience design side, is that a lot of design methodology is about removing barriers and making things simple and making them efficient. But if we remove all of our barriers and make things very simple and efficient, we might miss opportunities to learn. And so a lot of what I'll be showing you today are ways that we've played with adding in creative frictions to create these opportunities to learn. Sometimes that's an addition, and sometimes that's an omission, to create a space where the user has to ask questions and to explore the interface, rather than giving them all the directions up front and leading them through a highly sequenced, structured experience. So a lot of our early work in the lab is kind of in this, what we call this design play space between a very young kid's xylophone and Apple's GarageBand. There's a lot of things down for like toys and play and making musical sounds very young, and then you kind of get GarageBand here. And GarageBand is hard for some. It's not the easiest thing to get into for others, and there's a big gap in between there. So our first 5 years of the lab have really been spending time in that space. How can we take something like a GarageBand and create simpler, easier, more engaging ways to get material into that? And then how do we start with children's play patterns and augment them and add sound and creative play and kind of build up into that space? And you'll see a couple of those as we work today. And I'll be specifically walking you through 3 different projects that we've been doing, from an early just weekend hack experience that we created for the Chamber Music Society in Detroit to create a virtual piano duet interface, to a much larger commission working with the New York Philharmonic's Young People's Concerts and building out creative play experiences that go with more of their concert materials. It's more around providing opportunities for kids to compose and get to know the music before the concert. Then they have the concert, they have the experience, and then they can continue to play and create and make it their own after. And then one of our most successful projects called the Groove Pizza, which was born almost 3 years ago and just crossed 1 million pizzas created. So this is something with, when you have 1 million pizzas out there and then the data behind it, it opens up some interesting avenues for research and for looking at friction and freedom and where that goes together. So to kind of, be a bit more concrete about it, these were the musical interfaces that I often inherited when I was starting, and they're very complex. And that complexity and the friction in them and the freedoms they provide are necessary for professionals. You need to have all those degrees of freedom. You bring a lot of knowledge, you need to be able to make that from there. But then the standard approach to developing a lot of music creation apps for younger kids or for learning were to just start there and simplify. And that can create all sorts of challenges kind of in this process. So these are, on one end we have this, and this can be extremely crippling, particularly for novices. But this is also extremely crippling for novices. And this is how most of our music software starts. Blank. A blank page, a blank scene, a blank canvas, and you really have to have a fair amount of confidence in the ideas to start making those first marks and to kind of going in there. So a lot of what we're trying to do is bridge that space. So I'd like to dive in to our little virtual chamber music duet thing. So this was just a hack we put together over the weekend with the executive director of the Chamber Music Society, and he's a piano player. He would often go into kids' concerts at schools and slide down to the left-hand side of the piano and improvise on the black keys, and then invite a kid up to sit next to him on the bench and to play and improvise there. And he was always frustrated that that was only an experience that 2 or 3 kids could have, kind of around that. And he really wanted to have kind of a playful way of kind of engaging with that. So what we did was recorded a video of him that is just set to loop. So we have him playing there. And the design map was to just take the bottom row of the keyboard. Music, you have these piano samples just limited to 1 row. And one thing we noticed, because this is all living online, is that the kids that we gave this out to were spending 20 and 30 minutes with this loop going on and on and on. And so Something that enabled the play was the fact that the music didn't stop. The context kept going. And kind of that kind of work here. But there was also something we wanted to play around with. Did anybody pick up the mapping of the pitches? Is it on here? What do we have? Pentatonic, but is it pure pentatonic? What's no, odd there? For the musicians of the group. Yeah. Yeah, and so a lot of our music interfaces for learning often start with the theoretical ideals. Often they're in C and in major with that. Here we're not in it. And we deliberately added in this little dissonance as a friction to kind of spur the creativity. And so when we were starting to play test this, we play tested a version with it and without it. And the kids were playing longer with this little bit in here, and they were spending time because we were able to keep track and see what they were doing and play it back. They were spending a lot of time playing around with that dissonance. So as we're thinking about designing these musical experiences, when is it too consonant and too well mapped to the educational ideal that it doesn't open up a little friction? So this is an example of a musical friction that we embedded in that then kind of helps spur some of the play and the engagement kind of going from there with that. So for this, it was really the loop that doesn't end, kind of creating that in and then kind of going from there. From here, we learned and then built this interface because we really liked the idea with kids and that. This is called the Accordion or the Qwerty Accordion. And again, this was kind of pushing back against, if you've ever used GarageBand or anything like that, they often map the chromatic piano keyboard to the typing keys. And that would freeze my students because they weren't, maybe the song in their head was in A flat instead of C major. And they couldn't kind of go through it. So here was one where it was about taking advantage of the physical affordance of the keyboard here, and I'll turn the note caps off. But here, though, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll put it into. I'll take it off of there for now. I'll put it into. We'll do natural memory. Yeah. So very functional with that, but then taking advantage of the diagonals on the keyboard to build chords. So the 1, 4 chord, 5. So now we have kids in 2nd and 3rd grade chording along and finding songs and just kind of playing around with this. So again, it's opening up freedoms there, but at the same time, for another group of end users, having all of that there is a bit of a barrier. So we're trying to play around with different designs that open up and kind of conceal that. The main thing that kind of came from this was an insight from when I was teaching middle school, is that my students wanted nothing more than to play directly with the songs that they loved. And so we created the ability to drop in your favorite YouTube video here and see if the internet plays with us. So you can now jam and play and improvise. And so again, it's kind of like, how do we lower these barriers with a simple interface that's familiar, with enough friction to kind of play around and to kind of go with, but then also the freedom to kind of play with something that's motivating and kind of going with it. So we're looking at all of these little, we still look at these as learning experiments that we iterate through, and we're learning, and eventually we'll maybe learn some good things and design some things from it. So it's always a mix, and when you develop a web tool like this that's out there, it's always interesting to see how people use it differently than you think. So that was just a quick one to that, and I guess at this point I can flip over to our groove pizza. This was a project that came from one of our master's students who's now a PhD student, Ethan Hine, in music education at NYU, and he was a frustrated groove drumbeat programmer. He didn't like how most interfaces were about putting that in. He didn't like to have. He didn't come reading a whole lot of notation. Now he's perfectly good at it. But here, one thing that he found in his research is we talk a lot in music about loops, but our visual metaphors for representing them are not loops within that. So we normally have this little grid down here to kind of put notes in and kind of play around with. So this was designed as kind of this circular way of playing around with that. And again, just like one of the critiques earlier, we don't start with a blank pizza. We start with an incomplete structure, an incomplete groove. We have, here, if I hit play here, you'll see a little bit, but basically each ring is a different drum sound as we go. So I'll go ahead and hit play. And we call it a groove pizza because you can click on it and have your shapes. Kind of play around with it. You can go in here and change the sound to play around with. But the other thing that you'll notice here is that there's no directions on this. So this was deliberate kind of friction that we were playing with as well. And it's very interesting when we play test this because there's definitely a group of people that want to know how does it work, they're frustrated, they want to do it. But again, we've deliberately left that out there, and as a result, because we didn't do it, now there are tens of YouTube videos that the fan community has created around that, and now we're trying to promote that. So you know, it's one of these things as we try to play around with what do we bring and what do we not bring, when do we want to promote exploration, but we also want to find ways of hopefully getting people at different levels with this. So still, if I'm going to create with this, I have to have a fair amount of confidence to kind of go in and some musical ideas and some willingness to kind of persist through to kind of create a groove that sounds good. So we needed some other ways of kind of getting into that. So we created these specials in here. And I'll go to one of my favorites, which is Billie Jean. And here, this project actually was commissioned by Herbie Hancock for an initiative called Math, Science, and Music. And in our design process, we involved both maths teachers and music teachers and students in the process because we were looking at finding a way of bringing this together to kind of playfully explore shape and groove and music and rhythm and angles and all of that together. And so here we have the beat to Billie Jean. Think about that. And what do you notice about the visualization of it? Yeah, it's symmetrical, it's very balanced, it's there. Now compare this with Herbie Hancock's Chameleon. You have a funk. You have the same elements. You have two bass drum hits, you have two snare drum hits, you've got these hi-hats in there that are regular, but the pop beat is very symmetrical. And the Chameleon is funky because it anticipates and it delays. And you can play around and start looking at and making these connections across there. You can still go and choose a plain pizza. But again, it would take a lot of clicks and knowledge. So we needed to find another way to kind of bridge math in a playful way. And so what we discovered through playtesting was that if we take regular polygons and make those as prototypes that we can drag onto the pizza, you can get to, and there's a lot of music theory behind this too, is that you can get to some really good sounding beats and grooves in 2 or 3 drags with this. So I'll go ahead and get the pizza rolling. I'll start here with here. So there's the bass drum ring. Put 4 on the hi-hat. Bring in 5 here. I can go into the 0-sided shape, for example. I also can play around with another one here. You can rotate them around to create syncopation live. And this was built for a mobile to go with. And then, you know, play around in this kind of playful way to kind of create this in. And then we started asking questions, what else through this kind of design could we, what are some musical concepts that are maybe we might not think we would get to until high school or college or with that, and how could we bring that down to very young kids? And so one of the ideas around that was to play around with the number of slices in the pizza. So here we've got it divided into 16, but I can go to the slider here. So if I go back here to our specials, here we have a 4-groove trap beat. And then it goes to the second pizza and the third. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an overview of some of the things you can kind kind of create with this. But again, when we were going through the design process, and I'll unpack a little bit of this more with our process in the afternoon, is that we wanted a play experience that's lasted somewhere between 20 seconds and 20 minutes. Kind of a wide range there. But again here, we wanted to, create, there's a reason why we created these 4 pizzas down here, because we wanted them to be able to create a longer musical chunk that was meaningful in the program and to be able to play around with the sequencing and that. But we definitely needed to put a friction in what we could do by eliminating other features, because we were like, oh, we can build this into a full digital audio drum machine and go on with that. But for there, we needed to limit it because we wanted you to be able to just play on this for a little bit and then be able to do something else with it. And this became part of our experience design, is that the core engagement as we look at this was the kind of creation of the beats, but then the success side or the end, or to use gaming terminology, the win state, is that you were so proud of what you created that you wanted to share it. So we had to create a whole thing in here around sharing, and we wanted to explore a few different ways of doing this. So you can share the link online, you can download as audio and MIDI, but now more and more of these creation environments are going online. So we can create, with one button here, open in Soundtrack. And so Soundtrack is a web-based freemium digital audio workstation. So there's my groove. So from here now, a student can play around in the simplified environment and then now export and now go into the more fully featured complex environment to add their voice, to compose, to kind of work into that and go further. So this was a case where we deliberately constrained the functionality so that they could go into another platform and do that. And just like with the audio, you can also do it here. We built an integration in here, if it's going to load. There we go. Everybody's online. Well, as this loads up, now this puts it into notation on there. And so a lot of the teachers that we were working with needed to have a system to kind of play around with that and then be able to go back and forth to kind of go into that. So we have it, there it is. And so there's our first bar of the Untitled Groove to kind of go into that. So we wanted to create this opportunity to share it in a bunch of different formats and then be able to continue to go and play and work from there. And one of the things that Herbie Hancock really wanted, and this you get into all sorts of tensions when you're designing with clients and all that, he wanted to display the interior angles. And so we have a bunch of kind of creative math prompts that teachers created from this around creating grooves that explore different numbers of acute versus obtuse triangles, lines, and shapes, and playing around with this as a way of having a groove demonstrate a knowledge and a play of symmetry of playing with these different concepts. That wasn't about having something that was accessible. No, you're going to actually create something from this and then bring it into something, hopefully, that you care about or play along with. So that's a bit from Groove Pizza and that. And then I'll give you a final kind of tour here before I wrap up of some of these young people's concerts, playgrounds that we created. Again, it was a metaphor of a playground rather than a game, even though my colleagues at the field still refer to them as games, and we don't say anything, but it is there. And you can see there's definitely some, perhaps some qualities. But again, this was built to live in their young people's concert library where you can watch the young person's concert. This one's around Benjamin Britten's Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra. Interactive videos with their teaching artists, teaching different concepts to learn from, and then at the end is a variation playground that you can then click into. I'll just click into this one first. And these three were developed over time and in order, and the design and what we learned from them changed dramatically kind of with this. So the first prototypes that we inherited before getting into this project, the students had to think through all the Italian terms first and all the directions before getting into the experience. So when we first did this, you went right into the creation experience, but we realized you needed something to kind of get started. So here we provided choice to, and again, not major in there. So this was kind of inspired by musical puzzle cards and composing and working with this, where you're exploring different shapes mapped to different sections of the theme. And you can come in here and explore. But again, where are the directions? It doesn't quite say, so it's promoting that. But one of the things that we kind of worked around with that was adding this question mark. And so right now, you don't have anything, you click on these and you can hear them. And then you can drag them down into the hair and you can create your own variations. But if you click the question mark, you then get a legend or a map or a key to the way that we've mapped these different things to get an understanding of it. And then if you need to know more, it opened up these ellipses. And then it gives you this information. So this is deliberate design and friction into getting that to hopefully get the kids to explore and to do that, rather than going, how do I do this and how do I do it well and be correct with that. And frankly, you know, the demands from some of the teachers we were working with were wanting to have a lot of that there too. So again, this is one of the ways we were trying to find to kind of balance this work. So this one's built around card sorting and kind of playing and kind of creating one that way. A younger interface was built around, we developed this around Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream. And again, you're given this kind of magical play space. This was about exploring Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream and music in the daytime being different from music in the nighttime and kind of have a creative space. So here, we brought a little bit of direction in there, dragged me to explore the music. So you can click, or if you have the iPad. Actually created a recording of my drawing and captured my process. So I can play that back and listen to it. And so my movements were recorded as a composition in a very kind of easy way. This one is about exploring kind of rhythmic density and high register and low register, moving into music in the nighttime, which for this is So this takes kind of a drawing, painting metaphor, and then creates this playful experience where as they move, they create sound and explore, and then they can go in if they want to, and kind of learn a bit about the logic of how that's been put together. That ended up with our final kind of metaphor was one we built around Dvorak's New World Symphony. And again, here was a slightly different thing. We didn't want to start with a blank canvas, but again, one of the things that we learned from this is we wanted to give the user kind of choice on the level of friction that they had going in. Did they want to start with a completely blank canvas to create with? Or did they want to start with a fully completed one that they could remix? Or maybe they want to start with create a beginning or create an ending to kind of play around with this. So I'll show you the remix one. And we're given a musical landscape here. We have 6 themes from Dvorak's New World Symphony. And we can take these and bring them into our canvas here. I'll turn this up so you can see this. Each different lane or column across is a different tonal area with the composition. And then you have foreground to middle ground to background with it. So if I click up here, you have that, and I can change the sound. And if I move it to the middle ground, the rhythm gets a little faster, and in the background it becomes an ensemble. So I'll bring another one up here, and then we can click on this to kind of hear and put that together. But it's basically this interface to start playing with these themes and combining and recombining them, kind of to create your own 5th movement of it, and then you can watch it across here, save it. You'll be able to also eventually open this up in Note Flight, open it up in Soundtrack as well. And then of course you can then, come in and create your own harmonic journey and play with the new one. If you didn't like that one, to kind of play around with. So I mean, these are showing some of those kind of developments with here. We still brought this in with here. And another one of those kind of freedom friction conversations we're having in our work is how do we, with these kind of web-based things, if you've ever done any of this work, it's really hard to maintain a community of users if you're the developer. And if you're a teacher, how do you share in ways with this? So we've played around with a bunch of different ways around that, and that's what our little share button is here, where anybody can go in and add a description or a content or a comment with that, and then this opened up here, I don't know why. Then you can just take the link and share it. So we have a number of people using this with Google Classroom to embed in and share and kind of do it. And the cool thing is that once you type this in, if that's your link, you can save it, but if you send that to your teacher or a friend, then your little description comes up front. And if they're then able to kind of play with it, but it creates a brand new version for them and it doesn't destroy yours. So we're trying to create these simpler ways on our end. I mean, it's making it simpler for us to manage, but also what's that kind of minimum kind of build out that we need to help it still be social and shareable as we work through these. So with that in mind, I'm going to come back to some of the things that we're thinking about from the research point of view. And this is one of the core things that we've been influenced by is Nathan Shedroff's work from Experience Design, where he's talking about good experiences have three main kind of things. They have an attraction, something that brings you into it, and then there's the core engagement. And there's a lot of different ideas around what makes a good engagement, but then there's also some conclusion. There's some personal sense of satisfaction at the end that you either want to share it or you feel completion, because if you get into it and it's there and you don't have an ending, that can also kind of work with that. And then this was inspired by earlier work that I did with Steve Dillon and Andrew Brown with a tool called Jam to Jam. That was a similar thing. It was actually the metaphor that inspired the Mendelssohn moving around, which was this collaborative audio-visual jamming interface but it was connected over a network. So I would go on here and maybe I would be the piano and I could move around in visual transformations, and maybe you were in Australia and you got into my room and you were the guitar. And we could kind of improvise and play together. And the research that came out of that was a framework they developed called meaningful musical engagement, which came from studying these musical interactions, not gaming, not play, but looking at these kind of music things. And for these experiences to be successful, they needed to be successful